At 8:16 on a bitter March morning, with snow scratching against the 48th floor windows of Valcrest Tower, Elias Mercer watched the woman who owned half the Denver skyline lift a white porcelain cup toward her mouth. He was standing 30 feet away in the executive dining room, one hand still wrapped around the handle of a gray maintenance cart, his faded work shirt damp beneath the arms. Around the long walnut table sat 12 attorneys, bankers, and board members dressed in clothes that cost more than his car. At the head of the table, Camille Vale listened to a lawyer describe the final conditions of the largest acquisition in her company's history. She looked composed, almost carved from stone, but Elias saw the weariness around her eyes. Beside her stood Grant Holloway, Valcrest's chief operating officer and Camille's fiancé, smiling as though the morning belonged to him. 5 minutes earlier, Elias had watched Grant open a silver capsule behind the service pantry door and empty its contents into Camille's cup. Now steam drifted across her face as she raised it. Elias had spent 7 years learning how to be unnoticed. He had learned to lower his eyes when executives passed, to step into corners when private conversations began, and to accept the little humiliations people reserved for men whose names were stitched above their pockets. He had swallowed insults, scrubbed wine from conference room carpets, cleaned up after people who never said thank you, and let the world believe he had no education beyond a trade certificate. All of it had been for one purpose: to find the truth about his wife's death without leaving his daughter alone. But as Camille's fingers tightened around the handle, 7 years of patience ended. Elias released the cart and crossed the room so quickly that one of the bankers jerked back in alarm. "Ms. Vale," he said, louder than he intended. No one reacted at first. A maintenance worker had spoken during a billion-dollar meeting, and the breach of hierarchy stunned them more than the urgency in his voice. Camille turned slightly. The rim of the cup was less than an inch from her lips. Elias looked directly at her. "Set it down." Grant's smile vanished. "Excuse me?" Camille asked. "Please," Elias said. His voice shook, but he did not look away. "That coffee will stop your heart." 2 security officers seized him before he reached the table. One drove his arm behind his back while the other shoved him against a paneled wall, rattling the framed photographs of Valcrest's founder. Someone shouted for the police. An attorney demanded that the room be cleared. Grant moved toward Camille with his hand extended, his expression transformed into practiced concern. "Give me the cup, sweetheart. We don't know what this man has done." Camille did not hand it over. She lowered it to the saucer and studied Elias as the guards pinned him. He had seen her many times during his 4 years in the tower, though she had probably seen him only as a moving uniform at the edge of her vision. She was 45, tall and severe in a dark green suit, with a streak of silver beginning at one temple. Financial magazines described her as cold, but Elias had watched her stay late to rewrite layoffs into a retraining plan and once kneel in a lobby to help an elderly courier gather spilled envelopes. She was not warm exactly. Warmth had been trained out of her, but she paid attention, and at that moment she was paying attention to Grant's hand. It hovered above the cup without touching it. "Who are you?" she asked Elias. One guard tightened his grip. Elias felt something pull in his shoulder. "Elias Mercer, building systems contractor." "He changes filters and unclogs drains," Grant said with a dismissive laugh. "He is either unstable or trying to disrupt the closing. Remove him." Camille kept her gaze on Elias. "How do you know what is in my coffee?" "Because I saw him put it there." Elias nodded toward Grant. The room went silent enough for him to hear snow tapping the glass. Grant's face did not change, but a pulse jumped along his jaw. "That is a lie." "Then take a drink," Camille said. She spoke quietly. Several people turned toward her. Grant stared at the cup. Camille, don't be absurd. You brought it to me because Tessa was busy. You stood in the pantry for nearly a minute. Her eyes narrowed. Take a drink, Grant. He looked around the table as if seeking support, but no one moved. Camille slid the saucer toward him with 2 fingers. The porcelain made a soft scraping sound across the walnut. You have told me for 9 years that I could trust you with my life. Here it is. Grant's composure cracked. He struck the saucer with the back of his hand. The cup flew from the table and shattered against the stone floor, splashing coffee across the shoes of a senior partner. The room erupted. Camille did not flinch. She looked at the dark liquid spreading between the fragments, then at the man she had planned to marry in 6 weeks. No one leaves, she said. Lock the doors. 7 years earlier, Elias had not worn a uniform or pushed a maintenance cart. He had been an industrial cybersecurity engineer for a regional energy company, the kind of quiet specialist who could find a hidden flaw inside 10,000 lines of code and then forget where he had left his own car keys. His wife, Becca, teased him about that. Rebecca Mercer remembered everything. Birthdays, account numbers, the names of waitresses, the exact place she had set down her wedding ring before kneading bread. She had a laugh that began in her chest and took over the room, and when she concentrated, she tucked one side of her hair behind her ear with the cap of whatever pen she was holding. They lived in a modest brick house in Aurora with a crooked back fence and a furnace that complained every winter. Their daughter, Maisie, was born with a serious congenital heart defect. For the first year of her life, Elias and Becca measured time and oxygen levels, medication intervals, and the green digits of hospital monitors. They slept in chairs beside her crib and celebrated ounces of weight gain like holidays. Becca returned to work at Valcrest Holdings when Maisie was 10 months old because the company's insurance plan covered the pediatric cardiac team that had saved her. She was a forensic compliance analyst, brilliant with patterns and stubborn about numbers that did not belong. One rainy October night, she called Elias from the underground garage of Valcrest Tower. He could hear car alarms chirping behind her and the quick rhythm of her breathing. I found something, she said. Not a mistake, a system. Elias had been standing at their kitchen counter crushing Maisie's medicine into applesauce. What kind of system? Reserve money moved through vendor accounts. It goes out as infrastructure consulting and comes back through private partnerships. I traced one stream to a company that does not exist. She lowered her voice. There are executive approvals buried in the audit logs. Someone has been doing this for years. Elias told her to leave everything and come home. Becca said she had copied the critical files to an encrypted archive and split the access key in 2. One part was hidden somewhere only he would think to look. The other remained inside the company network. Don't call anyone there, she warned. Not yet. I don't know how high this goes. Those were the last complete words Elias ever heard from her. Her car was found before dawn at the bottom of a ravine west of Golden. The state patrol concluded that she had lost control on a wet curve, crossed the median, and struck a concrete drainage wall. There were no skid marks. The airbag control module had been removed from the wreck before the vehicle reached the impound lot, though the paperwork blamed damage from the collision. Becca's work laptop disappeared. Her purse was recovered, but the small brass flash drive she always kept on her keyring was gone. 2 detectives listened politely when Elias described the phone call, then explained that grief often caused people to connect unrelated events. Valcrest issued a statement praising Becca's service, paid for the funeral, and sent a basket of white flowers so large that Elias could barely see the coffin behind it. Grant Holloway attended for 12 minutes. He told Elias that Becca had been a valued member of the corporate family, then checked his watch while Elias thanked him. At the time, Grant was not yet Camille's fiancé. He was a rapidly rising operations executive trusted by Camille's father, August Vale, and admired for making difficult problems disappear. Elias remembered the cool pressure of Grant's hand and the clean scent of his cologne. For years afterward, that scent returned in dreams. Becca's death broke the Mercer household without making a sound. Elias resigned from his engineering job because Maisie's health could not tolerate a revolving door of caregivers. The house was lost 18 months later. He and Maisie moved into a second-floor apartment above a laundromat, where the pipes knocked at night and the windows trembled whenever delivery trucks passed. He sold Becca's car, then his tools, then the vintage guitar his father had left him. What remained of his life narrowed to his daughter, his grief, and the unfinished sentence Becca had placed in his hands. Somewhere only he would think to look. It took him 11 months to understand. Becca had hidden the first half of the encryption key inside a recording of Maisie's heartbeat, captured during her first surgery and stored in a wooden music box Elias had built from walnut scraps. The audio contained a pattern of altered frequencies. When he decoded them, he found 24 characters and a message from Becca. ELI, trust the numbers, not the titles. The second half of the key was still inside Valicrest. Elias could not reach it through the public network. The company's defenses had been rebuilt after Becca's death, and any direct intrusion would lead investigators back to him. He needed physical access without attracting attention, which meant becoming the kind of man powerful people did not remember seeing. He took a job with Mountain West Facility Services, first maintaining warehouses, then hospitals, then high-rise offices. He never falsified his identity, but he omitted 2 degrees and 15 years of technical experience. On applications, he described himself as a widowed father seeking stable night work. That was true. He learned boilers, air handlers, elevator controls, plumbing systems, and every practical skill that made him useful without making him interesting. After 3 years, he requested a transfer to Valicrest Tower. For the next 4, he worked from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning, repairing whatever executives broke and listening to what they said after they stopped noticing him. He learned that the 48th floor had its own isolated network, that Grant's office printer retained deleted job histories, and that Nolan Pierce, the chief financial officer, carried 2 phones but left only one on his desk. Elias installed nothing that could be found in a casual inspection. He used maintenance diagnostics, forgotten printer caches, backup logs, and the legal access credentials granted to building systems personnel. Piece by piece, he reconstructed Becca's trail. The reserve theft was larger than she had known. Nearly $186 million had moved through 3 shell vendors over 11 years. Grant approved the operational expenses. Nolan buried them in consolidated reports. The second half of Becca's key had been divided among archived audit packets and disguised as obsolete equipment serial numbers. Elias recovered all but 4 characters. Without them, the archive remained sealed. Without the archive, he had financial irregularities but no direct evidence tying Grant to Becca's death. He could have gone to regulators with what he had, but he feared Grant would destroy the rest, deny everything, and use Valicrest's lawyers to bury him. So Elias stayed quiet. Every night, he carried a compact computer beneath the false panel of his tool cart. Every morning, he returned home before Maisie woke, made pancakes from a mix that came in a yellow box, and pretended his hands shook from too much coffee. Maisie knew her father worked in a tall building downtown. She did not know he was hunting the man who had taken her mother. At 8, she was small for her age and observant in the way children become observant when adults whisper about their health. She could identify her medications by color and knew how to press 2 fingers to her neck when she felt dizzy. Her lips turned pale when she was tired, but she disliked being treated as fragile. She drew horses on every piece of paper she could find and wanted to become a park ranger, though she had never been farther from Denver than Colorado Springs. On difficult mornings, Elias sat behind her and braided her hair from a tutorial he had watched dozens of times. His braids were uneven, and Maisie always checked them in the microwave door. "Mom would have done it better," she once said. Elias paused with the elastic between his fingers. Your mom did most things better. Maisie considered this and patted his hand. You're staying longer. The week before the acquisition meeting, her cardiologist explained that the repair performed when she was a baby was beginning to fail. She needed another complex operation within months, not years. Insurance would cover much of it, but not the travel, prolonged rehabilitation, specialized imaging, or the growing list of treatments that might follow. Elias left the clinic carrying a folder of estimates and listened to Maisie talk about a science project as though the floor had not just dropped beneath him. At a red light, she looked over from the passenger seat of his rusted Subaru. Are we in trouble? No. You make that line between your eyes when we're in trouble. Elias forced himself to relax his face. We have a hard hill ahead. That's different. Are you scared? He could have lied. Instead, he said, yes. Maisie reached across the console and placed her small hand over his. Me too. They sat through the green light until someone honked behind them. That night, after she fell asleep, Elias spread Becca's records across the kitchen table and decided he could no longer afford patience. The next morning, he learned Valicrest was acquiring Asterion Medical Systems, a company whose surgical imaging technology was expected to reshape pediatric heart care. The deal required Camille's signature and an independent audit of Valicrest's capital reserves. For the first time in 11 years, outside examiners would inspect the accounts Grant and Nolan had manipulated. Elias felt hope, then fear. Men who had killed once would not wait calmly for auditors to arrive. The warning came through a machine no executive would have noticed. 2 nights before the signing, Elias was called to repair a temperature control fault in Grant's private wine cabinet. The cabinet shared a service cavity with the executive conference room, separated by decorative paneling and a narrow return air passage. Elias removed a grill and found that the fault had been created deliberately by loosening a sensor wire. Someone wanted maintenance summoned at a predictable time. He was reconnecting it when voices entered the conference room on the other side of the wall. Grant spoke first. The Geneva team lands at 6. Camille moved the reserve review ahead of the signing. Nolan Pierce answered in a strained whisper. Then postpone the deal. She won't. Asterion's board has another bidder, and Camille would rather burn money than appear afraid. Papers rustled. Grant's voice dropped. Once the transaction closes, the legacy accounts are absorbed into the restructuring pool. The old trails become noise, but she has to sign before the audit begins. Nolan said nothing for several seconds. You told me there was another way. There is. I will not be involved in that. Grant laughed softly. You were involved the day Rebecca Mercer's car left the road. Elias stopped breathing. His screwdriver slipped from his hand and struck the metal cabinet floor. The sound seemed deafening. He pressed himself against the wall, waiting for the voices to stop. But Grant continued. You authorized the emergency payment. You erased the vendor record. You bought your house in Vale with my money. Do not discover a conscience now. Nolan sounded close to panic. What are you planning? A medical emergency. Camille has a congenital rhythm irregularity documented in her executive insurance file. A small dose of the compound will look like a catastrophic cardiac event. I assume temporary authority under the succession agreement, sign the deal, and suspend the audit for 30 days. And if she dies, then I become the grieving fiancé who stabilizes the company. Elias felt the past open beneath him. For 7 years, he had imagined Grant as the architect of Becca's death. Hearing confirmation did not bring relief. It brought a coldness so deep he could barely move. Nolan asked where the compound would be kept. Grant said it would arrive in a laboratory courier packet labeled for Asterion's demonstration team and remain in the service pantry refrigerator until the morning meeting. Elias activated the diagnostic recorder on his work tablet. It captured only the final 90 seconds before footsteps moved toward the door. He withdrew from the cabinet, replaced the grill, and rolled his cart into the service hallway just as Grant emerged. Grant glanced at him. "Problem fixed?" Elias looked down respectfully. "Loose sensor." "Then try not to charge us 3 hours for 10 minutes of work." Elias swallowed the rage in his throat. "Yes, sir." He did not sleep that night. He copied the recording, the reconstructed ledgers, and Becca's partial archive to 3 encrypted drives. One went into a safe deposit box. One he taped beneath the drawer of his neighbor's sewing cabinet after explaining that it contained documents for Maisie if he failed to come home. The third he carried in the lining of his work boot. He also wrote a letter to his daughter. It was the hardest thing he had ever written. He told her that courage did not mean feeling no fear. It meant deciding what mattered more than fear. He told her that her mother had been brave and that every decent thing in him had been made stronger by loving them both. He did not tell her he expected to die. At 5 a.m, he stood in her doorway watching the rise and fall of her narrow shoulders beneath a quilt Becca's mother had sewn. Maisie opened her eyes. "You're staring. I was checking on you." "You checked too loud." She sat up and saw that he was already dressed for work. "Big day?" "Something like that." "Come here." He crossed the room. She wrapped both arms around his neck, careful of the old ache in his shoulder. "You smell like the basement at school," she murmured. He laughed despite himself. "That's a cruel thing to say to a man before sunrise." She held on. "Come home for dinner." Elias closed his eyes. "I will do everything I can." Before leaving, he gave the emergency envelope to their neighbor, Rosa Alvarez, a retired school secretary who had helped raise Maisie since Becca's death. Rosa listened without interrupting. When Elias finished, she gripped his wrist. "You have spent years believing you must carry this alone because grief made you suspicious of help. That is not the same as strength." "I know." "No, you don't." Her eyes filled, but her voice remained firm. "Come back to that child." Elias looked toward the apartment door. "That is the plan." Rosa understood from his face that plans were not promises. By 7:30, Vallecrest Tower was awake from the lobby to the roof. Camera crews waited outside for the acquisition announcement. Lawyers moved through security with rolling cases. Caterers arranged fruit, pastries, and silver coffee urns in the executive dining room. Elias used his maintenance credentials to enter the service pantry and found the laboratory packet exactly where Grant had said it would be, tucked behind bottled water in a refrigerator drawer. It appeared sealed. Elias photographed it and called a federal financial crimes tip line from a prepaid phone, but the operator could not dispatch agents based on an anonymous allegation without corroboration. He called the Denver police and reported a credible poisoning threat. The dispatcher asked for his name, location, and basis for the claim. Elias gave everything, including Becca's death, knowing the moment he did so that his years of secrecy were over. An officer was sent, but downtown traffic had stalled after a collision on Spear Boulevard. At 8, Grant entered the pantry while Elias was crouched beneath a sink pretending to inspect a leak. "You're still here?" Grant asked. "Valve sticking." "Finish later. This floor is restricted now." Elias gathered his tools and left through the service door. From the hallway camera monitor, he watched Grant remove the laboratory packet, open the inner seal, and conceal something in his palm. Elias tried to save the video, but Grant's access badge disabled recording on the executive camera loop. By the time Elias reached the dining room, the coffee service had begun. Tessa Bloom, Camille's executive assistant, placed Camille's personal cup beside the machine and stepped away to answer a call. Grant moved behind the counter. His body shielded his hands from the board members, but not from Elias standing beside the service elevator. Grant opened the silver capsule. For one terrible second, Elias considered grabbing him there. Security would intervene. Grant would deny everything. The cup might be spilled, the evidence lost, and Elias arrested before he could explain. Then Grant emptied the capsule into the coffee, stirred it once, and carried the cup into the meeting. Elias followed. An investment banker blocked the doorway and glanced at his uniform. "Staff entrance is around the back." Elias tried to pass. The banker put a hand against his chest. "Did you hear me?" For 7 years, Elias had stepped aside when men like him used that tone. This time, he removed the banker's hand. "Yes," he said. "I heard you." Then he walked into the room and stopped Camille Vale from drinking. After Grant struck the cup to the floor, Camille ordered everyone away from the spill. The security officers still held Elias, though their grip had loosened. Tessa called emergency services. One of the attorneys suggested evacuating Camille through a private elevator, but she refused. If Mr. Holloway intended to incapacitate me, giving him an empty room would be convenient. Grant had recovered enough to sound offended. "You cannot possibly believe a building mechanic over the man you are going to marry." Camille looked at the shards near his shoes. "You destroyed the only object that could prove him wrong. Because he frightened you." "No, he frightened you." Grant turned toward the board. "This is sabotage. Someone wants the acquisition stopped." Elias spoke through clenched teeth as the guard pressed on his injured shoulder. "Check the silver capsule in his right jacket pocket." Grant's hand moved reflexively toward it. Camille saw. So did everyone else. "Roy," she said to the head of security, "search him." Roy Kellum had protected the Vale family for 20 years. He hesitated, torn between protocol and loyalty. Grant stepped back. "Touch me, and you're fired." Roy looked at Camille. She nodded once. The search produced the capsule, a disposable glove, and a torn courier label from the laboratory packet. Grant claimed Elias had planted them. Elias asked the guards to release one hand so he could reach his boot. They refused until Camille ordered them. He pulled out the encrypted drive and placed it on the table. "This contains 11 years of reserve transfers, archived approvals, and a recording from Tuesday night. It also contains the work my wife was killed for." Camille's expression shifted at the word wife. Who was she? Rebecca Mercer. Nolan Pierce made a sound like a man choking. Camille turned toward him. Nolan stared at the table. Grant closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, and that tiny surrender told Camille more than any denial. She looked back at Elias. "Rebecca worked in compliance. She called me from this building 7 years ago. She said she had found money being moved through false vendors. Half an hour later, her car was driven off the road." Driven? The vehicle control unit was accessed remotely. She was not killed by weather. Grant laughed, but the sound was thin. That technology did not exist in the way he is describing. Elias faced him. "It existed in Valicrest's Fleet Security Division. I found the test logs. You used a contractor credential created 3 days before Becca died and deleted the account the next morning." Grant's eyes hardened. "You have no idea what you found." "I know the credential was approved from your office." Nolan pushed back from the table. "I need legal counsel." Camille looked at him with growing horror. "Why would you need counsel, Nolan?" "Because this room has become irrational. Sit down." "Camille, sit down." The police arrived 4 minutes later, followed by paramedics and a hazardous materials unit. Grant attempted to leave through the private corridor, claiming he was going to meet them, but Roy blocked the door. Officers separated everyone and secured the dining room. A technician collected the broken cup, wet coffee from the floor, the capsule, and the courier packaging. Camille insisted that Elias's drive be examined on an isolated computer rather than the corporate network. Valecrest's chief information officer, Miriam Cho, created a sterile environment while detectives stood behind her. The recording played first. Grant's voice filled the room. "You were involved the day Rebecca Mercer's car left the road." Nolan's response was muffled, but his fear was unmistakable. Then came Grant's plan for a medical emergency and temporary authority. Camille listened without moving. When the audio ended, she removed her engagement ring and set it beside the keyboard. Miriam opened the reconstructed ledgers. The screen displayed transfers from Valecrest reserve accounts into firms with respectable names and non-existent employees. Hundreds of entries had been approved through Grant's operations credentials and reconciled through Nolan's finance department. Property records linked one shell company to Nolan's mountain home. Another had paid for Grant's yacht, private travel, and a trust registered in the Cayman Islands. Still, the archive Becca created remained partly locked. Elias entered the characters he had recovered from the music box and audit records. 4 spaces remained empty. "Those are in the system somewhere," he said. Becca split the key so no single copy could be destroyed. Miriam searched the old compliance server backups. Most had been purged under a retention order signed by Grant 6 weeks after Becca's death. Camille walked to the window, her arms folded tightly. "My father approved that purge." "Your father was dying," Nolan said. It was the first honest sentence he had spoken. Camille turned. Nolan's face crumpled. "He signed whatever Grant placed in front of him during those last months. We told ourselves we were protecting the company." "From what?" "From scandal. From creditors. From you." Grant snapped. "Stop talking." Nolan looked at him, then at the officers near the door. Fear finally outweighed loyalty. "Rebecca found the reserve accounts. She confronted me first. I told Grant because I thought he would move the money back and make it disappear before the auditors saw it. Instead, he hired a man to intercept her on the way home." Elias stood perfectly still. The room blurred at the edges. "Name him." Nolan pressed both palms to his face. "Wade Brenner, former contractor in fleet security. He accessed her car through the emergency diagnostics module." "Was she alive after the crash?" Elias asked. Camille closed her eyes. Nolan began to cry. "I don't know." Elias stepped toward him, and 2 officers moved between them. For 7 years he had imagined what he would do if the truth ever stood within reach. In those imaginings, rage had always been clean and satisfying. The reality was different. Nolan looked old, weak, and terrified. Striking him would not bring Becca home. It would only give Maisie one more reason to lose her father. Elias stopped. "Look at me," he said. Nolan slowly raised his head. "My daughter was 10 months old when you helped take her mother. She is 8 now. Every birthday, every fever, every school play, there has been an empty chair. You will remember that chair every day you are free, and every day you are not." Nolan's shoulders collapsed. Miriam found the missing characters in an overlooked disaster recovery image stored at an off-site data center. Becca had hidden them inside the metadata of a routine safety report Camille herself had reviewed years earlier. The archive opened. It contained copies of the Phantom Ledgers, messages between Grant and Wade Brenner, and a voice memorandum Becca recorded on the night she died. Her face appeared on the monitor, tired and frightened but unmistakably alive. Elias gripped the back of a chair. He had not seen her moving image in years. "My name is Rebecca Mercer," she said. "I am recording this in case the internal report is suppressed. Grant Holloway and Nolan Pierce have diverted at least $90 million from Valecrest reserves. I believe the theft has been concealed through vendor fraud, false infrastructure contracts, and manipulated audits. Grant knows I found it. If anything happens to me, it was not an accident." She paused and looked away from the camera. She paused and as though listening for someone outside her office. Then her expression softened. Elias, if you ever see this, I am sorry. Kiss Maisie for me. Tell her I tried to do the right thing. The recording ended. Elias bent forward, both hands on the table, and wept without sound. No one in the room looked away. Camille stood beside him but did not touch him. After a moment, she said, Your wife did do the right thing. Elias wiped his face with the sleeve of his work shirt. She should have come home. Yes, Camille said, and there was no corporate certainty in her voice now. She should have. Grant was placed in handcuffs after preliminary testing detected a dangerous cardiotoxic substance in the spilled coffee and residue in the capsule. Nolan was detained for questioning and later arrested after federal agents reviewed Becca's archive. As officers led Grant through the service corridor, he stopped beside Elias. You think this makes you important? He whispered. You spent 7 years cleaning our floors. Elias looked at him calmly. And you never once noticed what I was learning while I did it. Grant's face twisted with hatred, but Elias had already turned away. The humiliation Grant intended no longer had power. The uniform was not a disgrace. It had fed Maisie, paid for medicine, and carried Elias into the room where the truth needed him. Camille walked behind the officers as far as the elevator. Grant called her name, appealing first to love, then to shared history, then to the company's reputation. She listened until the doors opened. I mistook access for loyalty, she said. That was my failure. What you did with it was yours. She stepped back, and the elevator closed between them. Elias spent the rest of the day in an interview room at the federal courthouse, explaining every file he had accessed and every rule he had broken. He did not minimize his actions. He had exceeded maintenance permissions, copied confidential records, concealed technical equipment, and conducted a private investigation that could have compromised criminal evidence. His court-appointed attorney warned him that good motives did not erase federal statutes. Elias signed a written statement and surrendered his computers. Near midnight, the door opened and Camille entered with a woman named Maren Sloan, a former federal prosecutor who now led one of Colorado's most respected defense firms. Camille had changed out of her green suit, but she still wore the blouse stained with a few drops of coffee from the shattered cup. Her left hand was bare. Ms. Sloan represents you now, she said. Elias shook his head. I cannot pay her. I did not ask whether you could. Ms. Vale, I saved you because it was right. You do not owe me a life. Camille sat across from him. Fatigue had stripped away the distance she usually carried. Your wife warned my company. My executives killed her. My controls failed. My board failed. I failed to ask why a brilliant employee died days after raising concerns. You were in Singapore when it happened. That explains where I was. It does not absolve what bore my family's name. Maren explained that prosecutors were prepared to negotiate a cooperation agreement. Elias's evidence had prevented an attempted murder, exposed a major financial conspiracy, and preserved records that otherwise would have been destroyed. Immunity was not yet guaranteed, but the government had little interest in imprisoning its essential witness. You will have to testify, she said. Your methods will be attacked, your personal history will be opened. Mr. Holloway's attorneys will portray you as obsessed, dishonest, and unstable. Elias thought of the letter under Rosa's sewing drawer. I have been called worse by men who knew less. Camille opened a thin folder. Inside were copies of Maisie's cardiac records. Elias's expression changed. How did you get those? Your emergency contact gave the hospital permission after you failed to come home. Rosa should not have. Rosa appears to be a woman who does what she believes is necessary. Camille's mouth almost formed a smile. Asterian's lead pediatric imaging specialist reviewed Maisie's scans tonight. Their surgical planning system was designed for cases like hers. Dr. Celeste Navarro at Children's Hospital Colorado has agreed to lead a multidisciplinary review tomorrow morning. Elias stared at the folder. Why? Because my company was about to spend billions claiming it wanted to save lives with medical technology. Today, a man who maintains our building saved mine. I would prefer that the transaction begin with something more meaningful than a press release. Elias looked down. I do not want charity. Then do not call it charity. Call it restitution, responsibility, or the first decent use of money stolen in your wife's name. Call it whatever lets you accept help for your daughter. He was silent for a long time. Pride had sustained him when almost nothing else remained, but Rosa's words returned. Grief had made him suspicious of help. Maisie did not need his pride. She needed a heart strong enough to carry her into adulthood. No special favors that take a place from another child, he said. No doctor pushed aside. No rules bent. Camille nodded. Agreed. And every treatment decision belongs to her medical team. Of course. Elias pressed his thumb against the edge of the folder. Then thank you. The months that followed did not unfold like a victory. Truth created work before it created peace. Federal investigators raided offices in 3 states. Wade Brenner was found living under another name in Nevada and charged in connection with Becca's death. Grant's attorneys attacked Elias's credibility, pointing to his concealed qualifications and unauthorized data access. They suggested he had manipulated records out of grief. On the witness stand, Elias answered each question without anger. When asked whether he had deceived Valacrest about his background, he said yes. When asked whether he hated Grant, he paused. For a long time, hatred was the only place I knew to put what happened, he said. But hatred is not evidence. The files are evidence. Mr. Pierce's testimony is evidence. The compound in Ms. Vale's coffee is evidence. My wife's recording is evidence. Grant watched him from the defense table with the contempt of a man who could not understand why contempt no longer worked. Nolan pleaded guilty and testified that Grant had ordered Becca's death. The government recovered more than $100 million from offshore accounts and seized properties purchased with stolen reserves. Grant eventually accepted a plea agreement that guaranteed he would spend decades in federal prison. Elias did not attend the sentencing. On that morning, Maisie underwent surgery. The procedure lasted 11 hours. Elias sat in a family waiting room with Rosa, holding the old wooden music box on his lap. Camille arrived quietly and took a chair near the window. She did not bring assistance, security, or flowers. For hours, the 3 adults drank bad coffee and listened whenever the surgical liaison's shoes approached. At dusk, Dr. Navarro entered wearing blue scrubs and a tired smile. The repair had gone well. Maisie's circulation was stable, and the new reconstruction was performing as planned. Elias stood, but could not speak. Rosa covered her face and sobbed. Camille looked out at the lights coming on across Denver. When Elias finally entered the recovery room, Maisie was pale beneath the blankets, surrounded by tubes and machines. Her eyes opened slightly. "Did you come home for dinner?" she whispered. Elias laughed through tears and bent to kiss her forehead. "I was late. A lot late. I'm sorry." She moved her fingers until he placed his hand in hers. "Did you fix the hard thing?" He knew she was not asking only about surgery. "Your mom fixed the hardest part a long time ago," he said. "I just finished what she started." Valacrest survived, though not unchanged. Camille postponed the Asterian acquisition until an independent committee completed a full review. She replaced half the board, dissolved the executive succession agreement Grant had planned to exploit, and created a permanent whistleblower office overseen by outside counsel. Restitution funds were established for employees and investors harmed by the fraud. She offered Elias a large financial settlement. He accepted enough to secure Maisie's care and purchase a modest home, then directed the remainder into a foundation for families of hourly workers facing pediatric medical crises. When Camille offered him an executive position, he refused the first version. Chief Integrity Officer sounds like a title people use to avoid listening to the person who tells them no, he said. Camille leaned back in her office, surprised into a laugh. It was the first time Elias had heard her laugh without restraint. What would you call it? You call Director of Operational Trust, Independent Authority, direct access to the board, protection for maintenance workers, drivers, assistants, security officers, and anyone else executives treat like furniture. You are describing power. I am describing a door that opens from both sides. She gave him the job. Elias moved into a small office on the 36th floor rather than Grant's former corner suite. He kept his old maintenance name patch framed beside his desk, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as proof that dignity did not depend on who noticed it. His first policy required senior leaders to spend one shift each quarter with operational staff. Some executives complained. Camille scheduled herself first. She spent a night with the cleaning team, emptied trash, learned how to strip wax from a lobby floor, and discovered that one woman had reported a faulty security door 6 times without receiving an answer. The door was repaired before sunrise. Change came slowly, imperfectly, and without music swelling in the background. People still protected themselves. Managers still confused authority with wisdom. But workers began sending concerns to Elias because they believed he would read them. He read every one. A year after the morning in the dining room, Elias drove Maisie to a hill overlooking Golden. Spring had returned to the foothills, and patches of snow remained in the shade beneath the pines. Maisie could walk farther now without stopping. Her cheeks held color, and she complained that her father was too slow. They followed a gravel path to a young aspen planted beside a bronze plaque bearing Becca's name. There was no cemetery stone. Becca had been cremated because Elias could not afford a burial after the funeral. For years, her ashes had rested in a plain wooden box on the top shelf of his closet while he waited to feel ready. He understood now that readiness was another word people used when they hoped pain would leave first. It never did. Pain simply learned to stand beside other things. Maisie knelt near the tree and placed a folded drawing against the trunk. It showed 3 figures beneath an enormous yellow sun. One was Becca. Drawn with wings Maisie insisted were not angel wings but fast travel wings. Elias scattered the ashes where the roots met the earth. Wind lifted a small gray cloud and carried it through the pale leaves. I used to think justice meant making them hurt the way we did, he said softly. Maisie looked up. Did it? No. It meant telling the truth so they could not hurt anyone else. It meant coming home to you. She considered this with the seriousness she gave difficult questions. Mom would like that better. I think so too. A black sedan waited near the road, but it was not a company car. Elias still drove the repaired Subaru most days. Camille stood beside the vehicle holding 2 paper cups and giving them privacy. She had become part of their lives in the careful, uncertain way adults sometimes become family after surviving the same terrible morning. She never tried to replace Becca or buy Elias's forgiveness. She simply appeared when it mattered, at Maisie's school concert, at medical appointments, at the Foundation's first meeting, and once at their house with groceries after Elias caught the flu. When Elias and Maisie walked back, Camille handed him a cup. He glanced at it. She raised an eyebrow. Sealed bottle. Poured it myself. Rosa supervised. Maisie laughed so hard she had to hold her side. Elias took the cup. Far below them, the city stretched east beneath the afternoon light. Vallecrest Tower stood among the other buildings, its windows shining, No longer a fortress that held Becca's secrets, but simply a place where people worked and where truth, once spoken by a man everyone had overlooked, had finally been heard. Elias placed one hand on Maisie's shoulder. He did not feel powerful. He did not feel avenged. He felt tired, grateful, and present. For the first time in 7 years, that was enough. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is refuse to stay silent when the truth is at stake. For 7 relentless years, building mechanic Elias Mercer allowed the powerful to overlook him, while he quietly assembled the proof that would honor his late wife and protect his fragile-hearted daughter. When the decisive moment arrived, he stepped from the shadows, halted a poisoned cup of coffee, and blew open a billion-dollar conspiracy, staking his freedom, his reputation, and his very life on integrity. Elias's journey reminds us that dignity isn't printed on a business card. It's stamped on the small daily choices we make when no one is watching. Real courage is not feeling fearless, but deciding that love, justice, and family matter more than comfort. If a humble maintenance badge can bring down corruption, imagine what ripple your own voice can make in your workplace, your neighborhood, your home. So take a stand, even when your knees shake, and let truth echo through the halls that need it most. Did this story spark something in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you'll choose courage today. And if you want more real-life tales that light a fire in the soul, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell, because we're just getting started.